It starts like any other day until it doesn't. A black man walks into a courthouse, calm, collected, and completely unaware that he's about to be humiliated by those sworn to protect and serve. They think he's just another defendant, just another nobody. They mock him, degrade him, and violate him with arrogant impunity. But what they don't know is they just challenged the wrong person, because he's not just another citizen. He's the one person in that building with the authority to hold them accountable. What follows is a reckoning, a revelation, and a courtroom twist that silences an entire room. Stay with me. You won't believe how this ends. And hey, drop a comment below to let us know where you're watching from. The morning sun cast long shadows across the steps of the Westbrook County Courthouse as Marcus Bennett adjusted his tie and checked his watch. It was 8:15 a.m., 15 minutes before his scheduled appearance. His charcoal gray suit was impeccably pressed, each crease sharp and deliberate like the man himself. He took a deep breath before climbing the steps, his leather briefcase clutched firmly in one hand. Marcus had walked through these doors countless times, but always through the side entrance reserved for staff. Today was different. Today he entered through the main doors, blending with the stream of anxious defendants, harried attorneys, and weary family members flooding into the building for Monday morning proceedings. He wanted to see the courthouse as they saw it, feel what they felt, and experience what too many of his fellow citizens experience daily. The security line moved slowly, officers examining IDs, scanning bags, and waving metal detector wands with varying degrees of attention. Marcus stood patiently waiting his turn, observing the officers' interactions with those ahead of him. Some were processed efficiently with professional courtesy. Others, particularly those with darker skin, received additional scrutiny, unnecessary questions, subtle intimidation, all of it noted mentally filed away. When Marcus reached the front of the line, he placed his briefcase on the conveyor belt and stepped toward the metal detector officer Jason Reynolds, a courthouse security veteran with 20 years on the force, narrowed his eyes as Marcus approached. Reynolds had never made any effort to hide his views about who belonged in the courthouse and who belonged in the cells. "Hold up," Reynolds said, holding up a hand. "Step aside." Marcus paused. "Is there a problem, officer?" Reynolds didn't answer. Instead, he looked Marcus up and down with undisguised contempt. "Random secondary screening. Follow me." "May I ask why?" Marcus's voice remained measured, calm. "Because I said so," Reynolds replied, loud enough for others to hear. "Unless you've got a problem with following instructions." A few people in line glanced over, then quickly looked away. Marcus noted their discomfort, their reluctant silence. He followed Reynolds to a small room adjacent to the security checkpoint, a windowless space with cinder-block walls and harsh fluorescent lighting. Inside stood Officer Darrell Walsh, younger than Reynolds, but cut from the same cloth. He smirked as they entered. "What have we got here, Jace? Someone causing trouble?" "Just being thorough," Reynolds replied, closing the door behind them. "Can't be too careful these days." Marcus stood still, hands at his sides. "I'm due in court at 8:30. "I'd appreciate it if we could make this quick." Reynolds circled him slowly. "Oh, we'll take exactly as much time as we need. You people always think your schedules matter more than security." Walsh moved closer. "No ID, huh? Just trying to waltz into a government building like you own the place?" "I have ID." Marcus reached slowly toward his inner jacket pocket. "Hands up!" Reynolds shouted suddenly, drawing his taser. "Don't move!" Marcus froze, then slowly raised his hands. "My identification is in my jacket pocket. I was simply reaching for it." "I'll get it," Walsh said, stepping forward. He roughly patted Marcus down, digging through his pockets with unnecessary force. He pulled out a leather wallet, flipped it open, barely glancing at the ID inside before tossing it onto a metal table. "Marcus Bennett." He read aloud with exaggerated pronunciation. "And what's your business here, Mr. Bennett?" "As I said, I have a court appearance at 8:30. Reynolds laughed. "Right. Let me guess, drug possession? Assault. Resisting arrest. Marcus didn't respond. He simply stood there, hands still raised, eyes fixed on Reynolds. The silence seemed to irritate the officer. Answer the question. I've told you why I'm here. Officer Reynolds, I have nothing more to add. Something in Marcus's composure, his refusal to be provoked, seemed to trigger something in Reynolds. His face hardened. That fancy suit and attitude won't help you here. Check him again, Walsh. Something's not right. Walsh began another pat-down. This time even rougher. Got some nerve coming in here like this, he muttered. Hair like that too, looking like some kind of revolutionary. Marcus's hair was styled in neat dreadlocks pulled back and secured at the nape of his neck. Professional. Well-maintained, a style he'd worn for over a decade. Reynolds picked up a pair of electric clippers from a shelf. Security protocol, he said with a thin smile, plugging them into the wall. Can't have potential contraband hiding in there. Marcus's eyes widened slightly, the first real reaction they'd gotten from him. That's unnecessary and you know it. Actually, Reynolds replied, stepping closer, I determine what's necessary for courthouse security. He turned on the clippers, the harsh buzzing, filling the small room. Hold him. Walsh grabbed Marcus's arms, pinning them behind his back. Before Marcus could protest, Reynolds brought the clippers to his head and began shearing away his dreadlocks. The locks that had taken years to grow fell to the floor in clumps. Decades of identity, dignity, culture removed in seconds. There, Reynolds said, finally stepping back to admire his work. Much more presentable for court, don't you think? Marcus stood silent, his head now unevenly shaved patches of scalp showing through what remained of his hair. On the floor around him lay his dreadlocks scattered like fallen soldiers. His face remained composed, even as something fierce burned behind his eyes. You can go, Reynolds said, unplugging the clippers. Don't want you to be late for your court date. Both officers laughed. Marcus bent down carefully, picking up one of his fallen locks. He placed it in his pocket, then retrieved his wallet from the table. Without a word, he walked to the door. Nothing to say? Reynolds called after him. No thank you for the free haircut. Marcus turned just slightly. We'll continue this discussion shortly. Then he walked out. The main courtroom of the Westbrook County Courthouse was already filling with attorneys, defendants, families, and spectators. At the front, the empty judge's bench loomed, large polished oak gleaming under the recessed lighting. The bailiff stood at attention beside it, checking his watch occasionally. The court clerk, a middle-aged woman, named Sarah Winters, shuffled papers at her desk, preparing for the morning's cases. She glanced up as the side door opened, expecting to see Judge Peterson, the regular Monday morning jurist. Her mouth fell open at the sight of Marcus Bennett, his head partially shaved, his dignity intact despite the obvious assault he had endured. Mr. Bennett. She gasped. What happened to you? He didn't answer, just asked quietly, Is my robe in the chambers? She nodded, speechless, as he walked past her through the door marked Judge's Chambers. Minutes later, the main doors of the courtroom opened, and officers Reynolds and Walsh strolled in. They took their usual positions along the back wall, smirking and exchanging comments. Neither noticed the unusual. Tension in the room, the whispers, the sidelong glances. At precisely 8:30 a.m., the bailiff called out, All rise! The Honorable Judge Marcus Bennett presiding. The room stood as one, bodies rising, chairs scraping against the floor. A hush fell as the door to chambers opened and Marcus Bennett emerged, now wearing the black judicial robe that marked his position. His partially shaved head was fully visible, a testament to what had just occurred. Reynolds froze, his face draining of color. His mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Walsh, beside him, began to tremble visibly. Judge Bennett took his place at the bench, his eyes slowly scanning the courtroom until they came to rest on the two officers at the back. His gaze held them like insects, pinned to a board. Be seated, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the suddenly silent room. Except for officers Reynolds and Walsh, I'd like you both to approach the bench immediately, the high. Two men didn't move, seemingly unable to process what was happening. Officers. Judge Bennett repeated, his voice gaining an edge. Approach now. They moved then, woodenly mechanical like men walking to their own execution. Everyone in the courtroom. Watch the procession, each step echoing against the marble floor. When they reached the bench, Judge Bennett stared down at them for a long moment, letting the silence build, letting them feel the weight of what they had done. Officer Reynolds. He finally said, "Do you recognize me?" Reynolds swallowed hard. "Your Honor, a simple yes or no will suffice." "Yes, Your Honor." "And would that be from our interaction approximately 20 minutes ago in the security screening room?" Reynolds' face had gone from pale to ashen. "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Bennett nodded slowly. "I see. And Officer Walsh, you were also present during this interaction?" Walsh nodded, unable to speak. "Verbal responses only in my courtroom, officer." "Yes, Your Honor." Walsh managed his voice, barely audible. Judge Bennett turned, slightly addressing the bailiff. "Please secure the doors. No one enters or leaves until I say otherwise." The bailiff nodded. Moving quickly to lock the main entrance, Judge Bennett returned his attention to the officers. "Gentlemen, I find myself in an unusual position this morning. Prior to taking the bench, I was assaulted in this courthouse by two officers sworn to uphold the law." His hand moved to his shaved head. "The evidence of that assault is plainly visible to everyone in this room." Murmurs spread through the courtroom quickly, silenced by the judge's raised hand. "Officer Reynolds, please explain to this court why you felt it necessary to forcibly shave my head this morning." Reynolds shifted his weight, his confidence evaporating. "Your Honor, it was a security procedure. We didn't know who you were." "I.e., security procedure." Judge Bennett repeated the words slowly. "Is it standard procedure to detain individuals without cause, subjecting them to physical assault and humiliation?" "No, Your Honor, but is it a procedure to make derogatory comments about you people while doing so?" Reynolds fell silent. "And Officer Walsh." Judge Bennett continued. "Is it procedure to physically restrain someone who has shown no resistance, offered no threat, and is simply attempting to provide identification when requested?" Walsh stared at the floor. "No, Your Honor." Judge Bennett leaned forward slightly. "Look at me, both of you." They raised their eyes reluctantly. "I want you to understand something clearly. What happened this morning wasn't about security. It wasn't about procedure. It was about power. The power you thought you had over someone you deemed less worthy of respect, less deserving of dignity." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But here's what you failed to understand. The authority granted to you comes with responsibility. It requires judgment, fairness, and above all respect for every person who walks through those doors, regardless of their appearance, their race, or their perceived status." Judge Bennett turned to the court clerk. "Miss Winters, please note for the record that I am recusing myself from today's regular docket. Due to these extraordinary circumstances, the cases will be reassigned to Judge Harmon in courtroom C." He returned his gaze to the officers. "However, before we proceed with that, I am invoking this court's authority to address contempt committed in the immediate view and presence of the court." He looked beyond the officers to the gallery, where courthouse staff, attorneys, and civilians sat in stunned silence. What happened this morning wasn't just an assault on me. It was an assault on the integrity of this court, a contempt for the principles of justice and equal treatment under law. Judge Bennett's voice remained measured, controlled, but beneath. "It ran a current of steel. Officers, Reynolds and Walsh, you are hereby held in direct contempt of court. Your actions demonstrate a gross disregard for judicial authority and the fundamental rights of citizens. You will both surrender your credentials to the bailiff immediately and will be taken into custody pending a formal hearing." Reynolds found his voice, though it trembled. "Your Honor, please. We didn't know. You can't do this." Judge Bennett's expression didn't change. "That's where you're wrong. Officer Reynolds, I not only can but must. The integrity of this courthouse depends on accountability for all who serve within it, including me, including you, no exceptions." He gestured to the bailiff who moved forward to take the officers' badges and equipment. "But before you're escorted out, I want to be absolutely clear about something." Judge Bennett leaned forward slightly. "This isn't about retribution, it's about justice, about ensuring that no one else walks into this building and faces what I faced today, about making sure that the next person who doesn't fit your image of who belongs here receives the same respect as anyone else." He straightened up. "One final question. Officers, how many others have you treated this way?" Neither man answered. "That's what I thought." Judge Bennett nodded to the bailiff. "Take them to holding. I'll arrange for an outside judge to handle their contempt hearing. No one should be judging their own case, not even me." As the officers were led away, Judge Bennett addressed the silent courtroom. "To everyone present today, I want to say this. What you witnessed wasn't just about 2 officers or 1 judge. It's about a system that works only when we demand accountability at every level, only when we recognize that justice isn't just a word on the building outside, but an action, a commitment, a daily practice." He stood. "Court is in recess. Cases will resume in courtroom C in 30 minutes. With that, he stepped down from the bench and walked with measured steps back to his chambers. The door closed behind him with a soft, definitive click. Inside his chambers, Marcus Bennett finally allowed himself a moment of vulnerability. Standing before the small mirror on the wall, he examined what remained of his hair. His hand moved to his scalp, fingers tracing the uneven patches where his dreadlocks had once been. The physical pain was minimal, but the violation cut deep, the message behind it even deeper. You don't belong. You're less than your other. A knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." He called, his voice steady once more. District Attorney Elena Ramirez entered, her expression a mixture of shock and concern. "Marcus, I just heard what they did to you." She shook, her head words failing. "It's unforgivable, and yet all too common," he replied, turning from the mirror. "How many defendants walk into this courthouse every day and face similar treatment, Elena? How many are intimidated, humiliated, made to feel less than human before they ever see the inside of a courtroom?" She had no answer for that. "The difference is, I have this." He touched the sleeve of his robe. "This gave me the power to do something about it today. But what about tomorrow? What about everyone who doesn't have a robe to put on?" Elena moved closer. "The sheriff is on his way, the county executive too. This is going to blow up. You know that, right?" Marcus nodded. "It should, and not just because it happened to a judge. It should blow up every single time it happens to anyone." "What can I do?" she asked. He considered. For a moment. "2 things. First, I want every case Reynolds and Walsh have been involved with over the past 5 years, reviewed for civil rights violations. Every arrest, every search, every courthouse interaction. Second, I want body cameras installed at every security checkpoint in this building, with footage reviewed weekly by a civilian oversight committee." Elena nodded. "I'll start the paperwork today." "Good." Marcus straightened his robe. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to call my wife. There's a barber I need to see this afternoon." The news spread through the courthouse like wildfire. By noon, everyone had heard Judge Marcus Bennett assaulted by courthouse security officers for walking through the public entrance. A judge humiliated, stripped of his dreadlocks, only to reveal his identity and hold his attackers accountable. In the employee cafeteria, courthouse staff huddled in small groups, whispering, sharing stories. Some had witnessed similar incidents before but had remained silent. Others expressed shock that it could happen to a judge, though few were surprised it had happened to a black man, regardless of his position, assistant public defender. Tanya Washington sat alone watching the conversations unfold, her thoughts on the ice. Many clients she'd represented, who had complained of mistreatment at the hands of Reynolds and Walsh, complaints that had been dismissed, ignored, explained away. Maybe now someone would listen. By the end of the day, courthouse security had been completely restructured. A team from the State Attorney General's office had arrived to begin an investigation. The sheriff had issued a public statement condemning the actions of the officers and promising a full review of hiring and training procedures. But the real change was happening in smaller, quieter ways. In the bailiff who intervened when a security officer spoke roughly to an elderly black woman entering the courthouse, in the judge who delayed proceedings to ensure a Spanish-speaking defendant fully understood his rights. In the court clerk who made eye contact and offered a genuine good morning to each person approaching her desk 3 days later. Marcus Bennett sat in Antoine's barbershop in the heart of Westbrook's historically black Jefferson neighborhood. The shop was closed to other customers for the hour, a small courtesy arranged by Antoine himself, a friend since childhood. "Man, I still can't believe they did you like that," Antoine said, shaking his head as he examined the uneven remnants of Marcus's hair. "These cops really think they can do anything to anybody." "Not anymore," Marcus replied, meeting his friend's eyes in the mirror. "Not in my courthouse." Antoine nodded appreciatively. "So what are we doing today? Want me to even it up, or take it all the way down?" Marcus considered his reflection. "Take it down, clean start, fresh. But leave just enough to show what happened. I want people to ask. I want to tell the story." "You got it." Antoine switched on his clippers, their gentle hum nothing like the harsh buzz of the ones that had violated him days earlier. "You know you're all over social media, right? People calling you a hero." Marcus shook his head slightly. "I'm not a hero, Antoine. I just happened to be in a position where I could do something about it. The real heroes are the ones who face this kind of treatment every day without the protection of a title or a robe, the ones who keep their dignity, even when the system tries to strip it away." Antoine worked carefully, moving around Marcus's head with practiced precision. "You think anything will really change, though?" "Some things already have," Marcus said. "Reynolds and Walsh are facing criminal charges. The courthouse has new security protocols. But the deeper change that's going to take longer. Building a system where justice doesn't depend on what you look like or what title you hold, that's the work ahead." When Antoine finished, Marcus studied his reflection. The close-cropped hair was neat, intentional, a reclamation rather than a violation. He raised a hand to his head, feeling the newness of it. The possibility. "Perfect," he said simply. The following Monday, Marcus Bennett returned to the bench. His new haircut drew attention, but it was the changes in the courthouse that mattered more. New security cameras covered every entrance. Additional training had been mandated for all courthouse security personnel. A citizen complaint system had been established with oversight from community representatives. As Judge Bennett entered his courtroom, the usual call of "all rise" rang out. But there was something different in the atmosphere, something beyond the formal respect for his position, something that felt more like genuine awareness. He took his seat at the bench, surveying the room before him. Defendants, attorneys, court staff, spectators, a cross-section of the community he had sworn to serve with fairness and integrity. "Seated," he said, his voice clear and steady. "The court is now in session." The day's docket proceeded normally. Cases called, evidence presented, rulings made. But beneath the routine procedures ran a current of renewed purpose. Judge Bennett listened. More carefully asked more questions, ensured that each person before him felt truly heard. During the afternoon recess, he stepped out of his chambers and walked the public hallways of the courthouse. Something he had rarely done before. He observed the security checkpoints, the interactions between officers and citizens, the small moments that shaped how people experienced justice. A young black man, perhaps 19 or 20, stood in line, his shoulders tense, eyes watchful. Judge Bennett moved. closer standing near enough to observe but not interfere. The security officer was professional, efficient, respectful. The young man passed through without incident. It was a small moment unremarkable except in contrast to what might have happened. Weeks earlier, Judge Bennett felt a cautious hope. It wasn't enough. Not nearly enough, but it was a beginning. 6 months later, Judge Marcus Bennett stood at a podium in the courthouse rotunda, addressing a gathering of judges, attorneys, law enforcement, officials, and community members. The occasion was the formal adoption of the Bennett Protocol, a comprehensive set of guidelines and accountability measures for courthouse security procedures across the state. His hair had grown out somewhat, the style now, his choice, his statement, but he still kept it short, a reminder of that Monday morning and all that had followed. What happened to me was not unique. He began looking out at the assembled faces. The only unique aspect was that I had the authority to immediately address it, but justice cannot depend on title or position. Justice must be consistent, reliable, and accessible to all, regardless of appearance, status, or background. He gestured to the document being distributed among the attendees. The Bennett Protocol isn't just about security procedures, it's about dignity, about remembering that every person who enters a courthouse does so as an equal under the law, deserving of respect and fair treatment. Judge Bennett paused, his gaze moving across the room. 6 months ago, 2 officers thought they saw a black man who didn't belong. They acted on assumptions rooted in bias. They abused their authority and violated my dignity as a human being. But what they didn't realize was that in doing so, they revealed a systemic problem that had gone unaddressed for far too long. His voice strengthened. The measure of justice is not how we treat the powerful, but how we treat those perceived to have no power. The defendant with no resources, the witness who speaks limited English, the family member anxious about a loved one's fate. These are the true tests of our system. He touched his head briefly, a gesture that had become familiar to those who knew him. I lost my hair that day, but our community gained something more valuable, an opportunity to see clearly, a chance to do better, a commitment to genuine justice that doesn't depend on what you look like or who you know. The applause that followed wasn't thunderous. It was thoughtful, measured like the work ahead, but it was genuine, a recognition that something important had shifted, not just in policy but in perspective, as people filed out of the rotunda. A courthouse janitor approached Judge Bennett hesitantly. "Judge," the older man said, his voice low, "I just wanted to say thank you. I've worked here 27 years, seen a lot of things, kept my head down, stayed quiet. But what you did, that took courage." Judge Bennett extended his hand. "What's your name?" "Sir, James Williams." "Your Honor." "Thank you, Mr. Williams. But courage isn't just in grand gestures. It's in the daily choice to do what's right, even when it's difficult, even when no one seems to be watching." "Yes, sir," Williams replied. "I'm learning." That later that evening, Judge Bennett sat on his front porch, the summer air warm against his skin. His wife Rachel joined him, handing him a glass of iced tea before taking the seat beside him. "Good day?" she asked, though she had attended the ceremony. Knew the answer. "A beginning," he replied, "just a beginning." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the neighborhood children play in the fading light. Eventually, Rachel spoke again. "You know what I'm proudest of? It's not the protocol, not the changes you've made, important as those are. What then?" She reached over, taking his hand. "That you never lost yourself. Even in that moment of humiliation, even in the power you held afterward. You remained the man I've always known. Principled, balanced, just." He squeezed her hand, grateful for the understanding. Justice isn't about retribution. It's about restoration. Making things right as much as they can be made right. As darkness fell across the neighborhood, Marcus Bennett, judge, husband, community member, felt the weight of his position and its possibilities. The system wasn't fixed, far from it, but cracks had appeared, cracks that let in light, that allowed examination, that made change possible. What had begun as humiliation had transformed into purpose, not just for him, but for all who sought justice in his courthouse. And perhaps beyond. The work would continue tomorrow and the day after. Each case, each interaction, each opportunity to ensure that justice was not just a word, but a reality experienced by all who entered those doors, regardless of who they were or how they looked. That was the true bench he now occupied. Not wood, not title, but the space between what is and what could be, between fear and dignity, between power and justice. And he would hold that position with everything he had. Have you ever felt powerless in the face of authority? Ever been judged not by your character, but by your appearance? Judge Bennett's story reminds us that change often comes from those who experience injustice firsthand and have the courage to address it, that even systems resistant to reform can be moved when we insist on human dignity as non-negotiable. If this story moved, you don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like and subscribe so we can keep bringing you stories that matter, because real change happens when we recognize ourselves in others and find the courage to stand for what's right, even when, especially when, it's difficult.